I wasn't single online anymore, and I hadn't posted a thing. Someone had. It started with a Slack ping at 8:12 a.m. Austin time. Product stand-up in 18 minutes. Coffee cooling, brain loading. Jenna from marketing dropped a screenshot and 3 question marks. There I was on a dating app one didn't use, smiling beside my ex at Hamilton Pool, captioned like a brochure. We're Maya and Nate, creative, kind, looking for someone who loves dogs and breakfast tacos. If you've ever trusted the convenience of a shared cloud, you know the trap. The past isn't just archived, it's indexed, searchable, and if someone is determined, deployable. People think breakups are about feelings. Designers like me know they're also about permissions. There's a type I've seen, not villainous, not clueless, the curator. He saves ticket stubs and edits vacation albums at 2 a.m., not because he's sentimental, but because he likes arranging the story. You've met him. He's the guy who volunteers to handle the drive, and then becomes the drive. Nate fit that mold perfectly. Freelance videographer, immaculate camera bags, labels on cables. In courtship, that looks like competence. Post-breakup, it morphs into a quiet authority over what existed. You tell yourself you'll circle back to clean access later. Later never comes. He had kept our shared cloud alive, like a museum of us, and now he'd moved the exhibit to the lobby. The app profile was thorough in a way only a former partner could make it. My dog's name spelled right, my favorite trail listed, sunsets from our east-facing balcony sequenced like proof. It was pitched as ethical and adventurous, words that make you feel out of touch if you disagree. You might roll your eyes, but imagine your boss's boss seeing it before a client pitch on privacy UX. In tech, reputation is scaffolding. You don't want a rumor shaking the beams. I screenshotted everything, locked the album, and felt the dull weight of the risk, HR awkwardness, clients second-guessing, neighbors recognizing my patio. I revoked Nate's access, rotated passwords, and filed a report in the app. 30 seconds of form fields, 1 bland confirmation. Thanks, we'll review. That's the internet's most popular lullaby. Calm sentences that buy time. If you've ever hit submit on a complaint, you know how powerless it feels to wait in a queue you can't see. I wasn't going to wait. The analyst in me surfaced. Who benefits? What channels exist? Which lever moves fastest? Curators don't stop when you ask nicely. They stop when the cost exceeds the feeling of control. At 8:39, my phone buzzed with a local 512 number. No context, just a cheerful text. Hey, is this Maya? Loved your profile. Are you two open to coffee this weekend? I stared at the message, the tiny confirmation that the story had escaped the museum. The text shouldn't have rattled me as much as it did, but it was proof. This wasn't just Nate dabbling in nostalgia. He had built an interactive version of us and put it in circulation. The open to coffee line carried more weight than the sender intended. It meant that strangers now thought they were stepping into a situation that I didn't agree to, didn't create, and couldn't explain without sounding unstable. Try telling someone, actually, that profile of me and my ex isn't real, but the photos are. You either sound evasive or complicit. That's the problem with images. They're harder to argue with than words. A text can be denied, but a picture of you smiling in Yosemite is concrete. Social identity has a fragile backbone. One careless collage can fracture it. And if you've ever worked in digital design, you know platforms reward what looks authentic. Nate knew that too. He wasn't faking strangers. He was leveraging familiarity. When you date someone who's a curator, you let them manage details. You don't fight over who uploads the photos or arranges the trip album. But every small handoff is a subtle shift of ownership. People rarely notice how these micro-choices accumulate. What I learned that morning is you don't realize who holds the archive until they weaponize it. That's not about malice, it's about control. Some exes argue, some vanish. Curators archive. And when they reappear, it's not with drama, it's with structure. I wanted to believe this was a blip. Maybe he'd delete the profile once he saw my report. But then another ping came through, this time from a college friend in Chicago. Didn't know you were poly now. That's cool. I sat there, Slack still open, stand-up already underway, while a side-channel version of my life spread faster than I could catch it. And that's when the stakes crystallized. This wasn't about my ex anymore. It was about whether I could keep the professional credibility I'd spent a decade building before the algorithm rewrote me into someone else's story. I muted Slack, ignored the client pings, and stared at my phone. If you've ever tried to track a digital fire, you know the first step is deciding whether you're dealing with sparks or a blaze. I typed my name into the app search bar, and there it was. Our profile, live, polished, and verified. Verified. That little blue check that makes strangers trust what they see. It wasn't just a profile. It was a portfolio of us, staged like we were recruiting. The wording wasn't sloppy. It was calculated. We believe in connection, balance, and honest adventure. That sounded like me, which made it worse. Nate knew my cadence, my work voice. The photos were a careful spread. National parks, apartment rooftop, my dog half asleep on his lap. No drunken selfies, no blurry shots. He wasn't mocking me. He was curating the best version of us and assigning it to strangers. People underestimate how convincing a familiar tone can be. Here's the archetype at play, the storyteller who can't stand endings. For them, a breakup isn't closure, it's a pause in publication. They'll revise, remix, and publish again because the narrative matters more than the reality. If you've ever dated one, you know they don't remember arguments, they remember arcs. And the worst part? They believe their edits. That sincerity makes resistance look like overreaction. I thought about confronting him directly, but that would give him a stage. Storytellers thrive on dialogue, it's more material. Instead, I needed to narrow the exposure. I screenshotted everything again, filed a second report, and started drafting a calm but firm email to the platform's trust team. If you've been in tech long enough, you know the tone. Professional, non-emotional, heavy on brand integrity and misrepresentation. Not because those words reflect your panic, but because those are the words that trigger a response. Just as I finished the draft, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a stranger. It was my manager, pinging me with a question I'd been dreading. Hey, random, but someone on the design team just asked if you and Nate were running some kind of UX experiment on that dating app. That message from my manager sat on the screen like a trap. If you've ever had your personal life leak into your professional world, you know the panic. I typed back something neutral. Not me. Looks like a mistake. And hit send before I could overthink. But I knew that wouldn't end it. In offices, rumors don't need malice. They just need novelty. And what's more novel than a lead designer secretly A/B testing her ex as a brand extension? Here's the thing about workplaces. They run on perception more than truth. People might respect your portfolio, but one odd story can tilt how they interpret your every move. If you've ever been tagged as quirky or secretive, you know how quickly it spreads. In design, where everything is about user trust, credibility is currency. Mine was suddenly on the line because Nate couldn't let go of a shared album. I tried to calm myself by analyzing his angle. What did he gain? Storytellers don't usually seek revenge. They seek audience. The more people who saw us framed as adventurous, the more his curated version of us stayed alive. It wasn't about me. It was about continuity. And if you've ever dealt with someone like that, you know logic won't shut it down. They'll call it harmless, even flattering. I considered calling him. The urge was strong, just to cut through the fog and say, delete it now. But then I imagined the fallout. He'd spin it as collaboration, or worse, frame me as part of the performance. Confrontation with a storyteller doesn't erase the script. It adds a new scene. So instead I leaned on what I did know. Systems, documentation, receipts. I compiled every screenshot, every text, and every timestamp into a folder on my drive. That night, when I finally closed my laptop, I felt like I'd run a marathon without leaving my chair. I was exhausted, but not from work, from containment. And just when I thought I had it boxed in, a notification hit that made my stomach turn. Someone had tagged me on Instagram with the caption, "Found them on the app, goals." I clicked the tag, half hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. A girl I didn't know had reposted our dating profile like it was an aesthetic mood board. "Couple goals," she wrote, with a string of heart emojis. My face, my dog, my old balcony, all lifted from Nate's archive and broadcast to strangers who thought they'd stumbled on some aspirational lifestyle. If you've ever had your image recirculated without context, You know, that strange mix of violation and disbelief. What rattled me most wasn't the stranger's post. It was how normal it looked. That's the paradox of digital identity. An unauthorized version of you can look more polished than the real thing. In the age of algorithms, what people share is more powerful than what you deny. That repost meant Nate's project had already spilled into platforms I couldn't control. It wasn't just a dating profile anymore. It was content. There's an archetype worth naming here, the archivist. Unlike the storyteller, who rewrites, the archivist preserves with obsessive precision. Nate was both. He wasn't just spinning narratives. He was cataloging, backing them up, and exporting them to every channel possible. That combination is dangerous because it looks like harmless nostalgia from the outside. People like to believe archives are neutral. They aren't. They shape what survives. I messaged the girl politely, asking her to remove the tag. She replied with confusion. Wait, aren't you proud of this? You two look amazing. That's when it hit me. Arguing against your own highlight reel makes you look bitter. The optics alone boxed me in. And if you've ever tried to control how others interpret your life online, you know it's like yelling at the tide. Instead of chasing every repost, I drafted a broader move. I contacted a lawyer friend, not for a lawsuit, but for language. You'd be surprised how fast platforms respond when an email includes the phrase, unauthorized use of likeness, and potential liability. It wasn't anger driving me at that point. It was strategy. If Nate wanted to curate, I needed to escalate. That night, as I prepped the email chain, another notification slid in. This time it wasn't a stranger. It was my younger cousin, just 13, texting a screenshot with the words, why are you and that guy on my TikTok feed? That text from my cousin hit harder than the others. Strangers misinterpreting my image was one thing, but family? Kids scrolling TikTok, thinking I was performing a lifestyle I'd never agreed to? That crossed a line. If you've ever had a younger relative see something online that misrepresents you, you know it's not just about embarrassment. It's about losing control of how they learn who you are. The TikTok clip was worse than I expected. Someone had stitched together our profile photos into a montage, layered with upbeat music, hashtags about dream couples, and captions asking if we were relationship coaches. I hadn't realized until that moment how fast a single post could mutate. It wasn't just Nate uploading anymore. Other people were remixing his archive into content for themselves. That's how platforms work. They reward replication over truth. Here's the archetype underneath, the audience builder. They don't care if what they're sharing is accurate. They care if it performs. Nate had unintentionally handed them raw material. By curating us, he gave strangers a package they could cut, edit, and monetize. If you've ever been miscast in someone else's narrative, you know the frustration. Your reality becomes raw stock for someone else's reach. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept picturing my cousin showing that clip to her friends, maybe even her parents. In families, perception sticks harder than in workplaces. A teenager doesn't weigh context or consent. They just see the headline version. And once that embeds, it's nearly impossible to shake. By morning, my inbox had replies from the platform trust team, bland but promising. We are reviewing this profile for violation of community guidelines. Corporate speak, but it was the first sign of traction. My lawyer friend's phrasing must have worked. I forwarded it to myself, archived the evidence, and tried to exhale. Then, just as I was shutting down email to start actual work, another message popped up. This time it wasn't from a stranger, or my cousin, or the platform. It was from Nate himself. Hey, I think you're overreacting. People love the profile. Can we talk? I stared at Nate's message, reading it 3 times. Overreacting. That word stuck like a thorn. If you've ever had someone minimize your boundaries, you know how it feels. Like they're holding a mirror up to your face and insisting your reflection is exaggerated. He framed it like I should be flattered, as if public approval validated his decision to use me without asking. This is the archetype of the justifier. They don't deny what they did. They reframe it until resistance seems irrational. People love the profile. Wasn't an apology. It was a sales pitch. If you've dealt with a justifier, you know they can make you second-guess your own outrage. The danger is that sometimes you do. I didn't reply, not out of strength, but calculation. Engaging him would only feed his sense that this was a collaboration. and collaboration was exactly what I needed to dismantle. In digital spaces, silence is strategy. But silence also feels like surrender. That's the trap. Every path costs something. I went back through my screenshots, this time noticing details I'd missed. The captions mirrored phrases from our old vacation blog. He hadn't just reused photos, he'd lifted my writing too. That shifted things from awkward to actionable. Text has clearer ownership than images. If you've ever dealt with intellectual property disputes, you know how much easier it is to argue plagiarism than bad taste. That afternoon, my manager checked in casually. "Everything good with that app thing?" She didn't sound suspicious, more curious. Still, the fact that she asked confirmed my fear. The story had legs in the office. Credibility, once dented, never polishes back to factory shine. And in tech, where your identity doubles as your resume, I couldn't afford dents. I drafted another email to the platform, this time attaching evidence of copied text, legal phrasing included. I wasn't asking for removal anymore, I was demanding it. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Nate or a stranger. It was the platform itself. "We have taken action. The profile has been removed." For a moment, relief washed over me. But it didn't last, because less than an hour later, I got another ping, from a different app entirely. Same photos, same captions, a brand new profile. Seeing it reappear on another app was like deja vu with a cruel twist. If you've ever played whack-a-mole with online content, you know the fatigue. It's not the effort of reporting, it's the realization that deletion isn't resolution. The curator and archivist archetypes thrive on redundancy. Nate wasn't careless. He'd mirrored the same set of photos and text across platforms, anticipating takedowns. One profile down, 3 more waiting in the wings. What struck me was how platform design itself aided him. Each site encouraged importing content, recycling captions, reusing media. Convenience for the user, a nightmare for consent. It's the paradox of digital systems. Efficiency for one party is exploitation for another. And if you've ever been caught in that loop, you know how quickly you move from indignation to exhaustion. I realized then that fighting app by app was pointless. The archetype I was really up against was the network builder, the person who believes visibility equals legitimacy. To him, the more instances that existed, the harder it would be for me to erase them all. Quantity becomes credibility. Anyone Googling my name could land on one of his profiles and assume it was real. So I pivoted. Instead of reactive takedowns, I drafted a broader plan. I filed a DMCA request for the copied text and included a demand for cross-platform removal. I also updated my own digital presence, cleaned up LinkedIn, made Instagram private, tightened permissions on the cloud. If you've ever refortified your online perimeter, you know it feels both empowering and suffocating. That night, as I triple-checked settings, a notification I hadn't expected appeared. A calendar invite. Not from work, not from friends, from Nate. Title: Coffee? Let's clear the air. The time was set for Saturday morning at our old neighborhood cafe. He hadn't asked, he'd scheduled it, like a meeting that I was obligated to attend. The invite sat on my screen like a dare. If you've ever had someone treat a personal boundary as an appointment, you know how disorienting it feels. He wasn't asking for permission, he was assigning me a role. That's the justifier again, but with a twist of authority. By sending a calendar invite, Nate positioned the conversation as inevitable, professional, tidy, as if my refusal would be the thing out of order. I didn't decline right away. Part of me wanted to walk into that cafe, sit across from him, and demand answers. But I also knew that would hand him more narrative. Storytellers thrive on face-to-face scenes. They feed off the dialogue, the chance to edit your words into their script. If you've ever confronted someone like that, you know leaving them nothing is more effective than giving them new material. Instead, I forwarded the invite to my lawyer friend. "Document this," I wrote. She replied within minutes. "Got it. Don't engage." It was validating, but also sobering. This wasn't just an ex with poor boundaries. This was someone leveraging systems, cloud storage, apps, even Google Calendar, to maintain connection without consent. And the system design itself was complicit, making it seamless for him to keep pulling me back. At work, the situation had already become background noise. A coworker joked, "So when's the couples coaching launch?" I laughed it off, but inside I bristled. That's the thing about rumors. They don't fade, they calcify into shorthand. And once your identity is reduced to a punchline, clawing back credibility is twice the work. By Friday night, I made my decision. I wasn't going to show up at that cafe. I wasn't going to play the role he wrote for me. But I also wasn't going to keep chasing his replicas app by app. I needed something bigger, something final. So I opened my laptop, stared at the blinking cursor, and began drafting a public statement. Not dramatic, not emotional, just clear. My image, my words, my ownership. If you've ever been backed into a corner online, you know the only way out is to take control of the story yourself. I kept the statement short. No theatrics, no dragging Nate by name. Just facts. A profile had been created without my consent. The photos and text were mine, and I did not authorize their use. I posted it on LinkedIn first, then cross-shared to the accounts I controlled. That's the thing about digital reputation. Clarity matters more than volume. If you've ever had to untangle yourself from someone else's narrative, you know how grounding it feels to finally say, "This is mine." The response was immediate and surprising. Colleagues commented with support. Clients reached out privately to check in. Even the cousin who'd first seen me on TikTok messaged relieved. "Glad you explained. What I thought might brand me as dramatic instead painted me as decisive." That's another paradox of online life. People respect you more when you draw boundaries out loud. Silence looks like complicity. Nate, predictably, texted within the hour. "Wow, didn't think you'd go public. This got blown way out of proportion." That's the last card of the justifier, shrinking the harm when the audience shifts. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The statement was my reply, and it wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to everyone else. Here's the archetype I carried out of it all, the reclaimer. At some point, you stop playing defense and start redrawing the map. Platforms will always be porous, X's will always have archives, and rumors will always spread faster than truth. But if you take ownership of your image, if you define yourself clearly, you strip their leverage. You don't erase the past, but you prevent it from being reissued without your signature. By the following week, the noise had died down. My team stopped joking, my cousin stopped asking, and the reposts lost momentum without new fuel. The profiles vanished, not because I chased them, but because I reclaimed the story. And while it didn't feel triumphant, it felt steady. Sometimes that's enough. In the end, what I lost wasn't my credibility or my job. It was the illusion that silence protects you. What I gained was harder to see, but sharper to hold. The understanding that boundaries only work if you make them visible.